Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second of two local road safety plan webinars. We had a great turnout on Monday, over 160 participants, and it looks like we're at over 115 right now. So appreciate you taking a couple hours of your time this afternoon to join us. Overall, well, first of all, this local road safety plan webinar is hosted by a number of different agencies: Caltrans, Federal Highways, the LTAP, and a couple different local agencies. My name is Ken Kochevar. I'm actually with Federal Highways. I'm the safety program manager. I'm going to give a short introduction, and then I'll be facilitating moving from one presenter to the next. So I want to go over just a short intro here. It looks like I'm going to need a little help on advancing the slides, because again, it's not working. But overall, what we'd like to do today is to provide information in advance of what is going to be changing in the next 2 to 3 years, and that's all to help us meet the Towards Zero Death goal in California. We have a lot of efforts going underway right now, that being the Strategic Highway Safety Plan that is being updated. We have Vision Zero, different focus areas, and this is another piece of the puzzle that we believe will really help us, again, obtain or start reaching that goal of Towards Zero Deaths. So overall, what's in it for them, or in your case, as you're reading it, what's in it for you? Number one, we'll be providing a real good introduction to what local road safety plans are, and this will be from a high level, 30,000 foot level. Then we'll move into hearing from actually 3 local agencies on their local road safety plan development. 2 of them that were involved in a pilot that started in 2017, and another one that's completed the local road safety plan through the SARP. And then we'll move into a presentation on reducing rural roadway departure using the systemic approach. Since this is a real large area, not only in California, but throughout the nation, we wanted to highlight what different things are the issues out there and what different countermeasures there are, again, to reduce rural roadway departures. And Dick will show some good examples of why we want to use the systemic approach here, because those kind of crashes are very random, especially in the rural areas. And then finally, we'll wrap up and we'll hear from Robert. He's going to talk much more about the details on future local road safety program, or local road safety plans through the HSIP program. And he'll be talking a little bit about funding, timelines, requirements, sort of summarizing everything. And throughout this, we will have question and answers. We want you to use the chat box. Right now, everybody is mute besides the presenters. So use the chat box. We will be responding to those questions as we go along. And we should have a little bit of time right at the end after Robert is done, and we'll take any other questions at that time. We'll answer them live. The last slide here, the trigger happy there, just to go into a little more detail about the agenda, or to show you what those topics are going to be that I really already mentioned. The first one is going to be in the local road safety plans. Jerry from our Resource Center, Federal Highways Resource Center, will be speaking on that. Then we will have those 3 county examples. We'll have Bob from Marin County, Tom from Humboldt, and Julio from San Diego County. Dick will be up next from our Resource Center, and he will talk about our Everyday Counts initiative. That's the reducing rural roadway departures. And then finally, as I said, Robert will wrap up on the future to the local HSIP changes in regards to the local road safety plan. And as you say, there will take question and answers throughout. So with further ado, we're going to shut down this slide presentation, and we're going to load the deck. I think, Jerry, you're up first. So if you can load your slide deck or your presentation from your remote area, we'll turn it over to you, Jerry.
All right, thanks,
and
Ken.
Make sure you take your phone off mute, Jerry, so we can hear you.
All right, can you hear me now, Ken?
Can you speak
All right.
again, Jerry, so we can know you're coming through?
Yes, Ken, can you hear me now?
They're a little loud.
It's really faint.
All right.
That's better.
All right, how's that?
You can get a little louder.
Yep, just a little bit more if you can, and people may need to turn up their volume a little bit. Just make sure you're speaking close, and hopefully it'll come through. Thank you, Jerry.
You bet. I will do my best. I am battling a bit of a head cold here. So
Okay.
for those that were able to join us on Monday, you got to hear from Hillary Eisenbrand from our Resource Center Safety and Design team. For those, unfortunately, that had to join today, you're going to have to put up with myself. My name is Jerry Roche. I work in our Office of Safety. I can't do near as good as the job of Hillary on a good day, especially when I'm fighting a cold. So, so here we go. Today I'm going to give you just an overview of local road safety plans. I'll talk a bit about an effort we've had with the National Association of County Engineers, or NACE, on a pilot program, sort of a do-it-yourself type program. And we'll certainly show some examples and resources and opportunities for your agencies. But really, I am the warm-up act. I want to certainly save time for the three outstanding counties that are going to speak after me. So I'll just give you that 30,000-foot view and turn it over to them. So to get us kicked off, I'm going to start with a video. Hopefully you guys can hear this as I hit play, and you should be able to hear it through your computer speakers.
Over the last few years, FHWA estimates that approximately 40% of the nation's roadway fatalities occurred on local roads. So what are local agencies doing to change this trend and make their roads safer? They're making a plan, a local road safety plan. Local road safety plans are proven to help reduce severe crashes on local road systems. They provide a framework to identify, analyze, and prioritize roadway safety issues and countermeasures to address them. The plans all include some common steps, but they're tailored to reflect your community's needs. Let's drive through a few. It's important to identify stakeholders early on. These can include law enforcement, public health, emergency medical services, or elected officials. And it's okay to start small. This will be your team working together to save lives. Next, gather your roadway safety data. Don't have great data? You might have more than you think. You can use information like numbers of crashes, maintenance logs, safety audits, even traffic violations. The key is to start with the data you have available and grow it over time. Analyze your data to identify overrepresented crash types and areas that have the highest risk for future severe crashes. Then, choose low-cost, proven solutions to address those locations. The Federal Highway Administration's list of proven safety countermeasures and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's countermeasures that work are good places to start. You can implement solutions in many types of projects, from everyday road maintenance to capital improvements. The result is data-driven solutions, targeted investments, and fewer severe crashes in your community. So, start your local road safety plan today and help get people home safely.
So there you got to see a chance at a video that we put together, trying to make it simplified as possible about how these plans can be developed. It's a video that's gotten a lot of good attention and interest from agencies using that for the, if they're talking with their elected officials or whatnot. So it's certainly available. There's also an infographic that goes along with it. So after I get done speaking, I will put that in the chat pod so that you guys have access to it. So this slide just talks about California's Strategic Highway Safety Plan. Hopefully you guys are familiar with that document. Every state has an SHSP, as we call them. I know California is in the process of updating yours currently. This one concludes at the end of 2019, but it's really refreshing and great to see that your mission talks about all public roads. That's not something that every state has embraced yet at this point, and so it's great that California is really one of the leaders in that area, and not only addressing roads, but also sharing funding. And you see that there too. Just that chart on the bottom shows the just the breakdown of fatal and severe crashes happening on the state system versus the local system. So that's to be commended for what you guys have done there. So and really the steps in the local road safety plan aren't that much different if you're familiar with those steps in the strategic highway safety plan. As you saw in the video, certainly establishing leadership and reaching out to those stakeholders, those in law enforcement, those in public health can be a great asset, even education, EMS, those kind of things. Certainly your elected officials can be a piece of that as well. So really the next step is to analyze the data. As you heard in the video, you don't have to have perfect data. You don't have to have everything. We can work with what the agencies have available. There's a lot we can still determine. So really the goal is to determine your emphasis areas. And once you've done that, then really identify those strategies that are going to address those emphasis areas. Prioritize those activities and then implement them. And certainly even evaluate and update the local road safety plan. And you'll hear more about that, I know, from some of our counties today too. So there's a number of local road safety plan efforts that are going on around the country. One from Larimore County, Colorado, developed their own local road safety plan with no involvement from the state or no assistance from the state. There's been plans that have been developed by consultants in Clackamas County, Oregon is one of those, Joe Merrick up there. They've actually updated their plan several times. Their most recent update came out late last year, and public health has got a great presence in that document throughout the document. So I encourage you to check that one out. There's a number of Vision Zero cities that have popped up. San Francisco being just one of those that have developed plans. Looking at the state level, Minnesota was probably the first that got involved in local road safety plans or county state road safety plans. Up there, they developed their plans through consultants. They developed a plan for each of their 87 counties, which was very effective. It took them about 5 years to get that done. They're actually in the process of updating those plans now in round 2. And then Washington also wanted to be involved in plans. They took a slightly different approach. They wanted to have the local agencies really help develop the plans with their assistance. So they helped provide the data, help analyze the data a bit, and then have the local agencies themselves actually develop the plans so that they could save that money and time to really deploy countermeasures and improvements out on the system. So MHWA has had a number of efforts that involve local road safety plans. We certainly have worked with our consultant teams, usually develop seed projects or seed plans in different states. We've got one in Santa Barbara County, California. Our tribal transportation program has done an outstanding job of developing tribal safety plans. We have over 300 tribal safety plans that have been completed that are out there, some touching California. I mentioned just briefly about our NACE collaboration, about locally prepared plans, sort of borrowing from the Washington model, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go here. And then also even pedestrian safety action plans. I know there's 7 focused pedestrian cities in California that have had either technical assistance or developed actual action plans. So a number of efforts that's going on there. Just even more locally, looking at in California, I know you have several Vision Zero cities. Your Systemic Safety Analysis Report Program, or SARP. We had 5 counties that participated in our pilot effort from California. Those were Humboldt, MARIN, Nevada, Trinity, and YOLO. And you're going to hear from 2 of them in just a moment. I mentioned the tribal safety plans and really those focused approach plans as well. So this is just a map of those that we're aware of. We're trying to sort of keep an inventory of those agencies that have plans. So if you have plans, I'd invite you to let us know. I know we had a couple agencies on Monday that reached out and said that they had developed plans. So I'd ask you to, we can't do polling here, but I'd ask you to put that in the chat pod if you have a safety plan. We're certainly interested in knowing about it. Just a little bit here on the do-it-yourself type plans. We've worked with 9 states so far with 41 local agencies on sort of a blended delivery. That's involved a series of webinars. We've assigned homework assignments, as part of that. There's been some direct assistance, particularly with data analysis and whatnot, as well as an in-person workshop to really go through the systemic approach and help develop those plans. So we're actually gearing up for a 3rd round. We're working with 2 to 3 more states, kicking that off here in October. So lots to do on that front, but we're excited to help spread the word on plans. So just a little bit more on those elements that are involved. Certainly training is part of that through those webinars. There's a lot of technical support and data analysis support. Sometimes that's been involved with Federal Highway Administration, but a lot of times the local agencies themselves have helped with that, with the data analysis, either through LTAPs or universities or the state DOT. Certainly the workshop has been a big piece of this. And then in the end, they have a local road safety plan that's completed. And I'm really proud of the two that you're going to hear from today. So, why would you want to create a local road safety plan? I think California already understands this, but it really helps develop lasting partnerships when you reach out to your law enforcement colleagues or those in public health. There's a lot of this information as these crashes happen one at a time that we don't really summarize it. We don't really think about it. And so I think you'll see some great reward in working with others. It certainly increases the awareness of road safety and risks that are out there. We've worked with a lot of agencies, and like I said, some of them, they've read every crash report as they came in, but really until they analyzed the data in this format, they were surprised to see some of the things that popped up. So it can really help prioritize investments, particularly if you've got a board of directors that sort of gears where your projects go. A local road safety plan can help them sort of stay focused on what the biggest risks or issues are that are out on your jurisdiction's roads. It can help certainly provide support and grant funding and applications, and certainly Robert Peterson has been great at supporting what you guys are up to. So kudos to Caltrans for that. And then again, biggest issue is just the reduction in severe crashes, right? We all want to make sure people get home safely. This is a quote from Teddy Roosevelt: "Do what you can with what you have, where you are." And this is kind of our mantra throughout this process. As we've dealt with agencies, they say, "Hey, I don't have great safety data." Well, do what you can with what you have, where you are. Hey, we're a really small agency. There's only 2 of us in the entire shop. Well, do what you can with what you have, where you are. Hey, our state DOT is not inclined to share these safety funds with us, and so it's probably going to have to just be our own local money that goes after this. Well, do what you can with what you have, where you are. So it's really fit us quite well. Just to talk a little bit about the data-driven approaches, we do a lot with predictive analysis, and that's one of the things I spend a lot of time in is using the highway safety manual and using crash and roadway and traffic volume data to really predict and analyze safety performance of a roadway. Now, for local road safety plans, a lot of times on local agency roads, we don't have that robust data to do quite that rigorous analysis. But really, we have a systemic analysis approach that's highlighted in the Systemic Safety Project Selection Tool that is still data-driven. It uses those same concepts from the Highway Safety Manual. In fact, I'll tell you, the systemic analysis is going to be incorporated into the update to the Highway Safety Manual, the 2nd edition, that is scheduled for 2021 release. So that information is being added to that document as we speak. So very rigorous approach. Just to tell you a little bit more about systemic safety, really that our systemic analysis, that really comes from medicine. They've done this in health for quite some time. If you think back to the last time you went to the doctor's office, before you even saw the doctor, you filled out a form, right? They wanted to know about your family's medical history, what happened to your grandparents, your parents. They wanted to know about your personal health history. How often do you exercise? How often do you drink alcohol? Are you a smoker? Then they might have you test your blood just to see what that shows. That's all before you actually get into the doctor's room, right? They even check your height and your weight. That really helps them look at your risk profile and what you might be susceptible for. So, if I go in there and they find out that my grandparents all died from heart attacks, that my dad is suffering from heart disease right now, that I'm overweight, I don't exercise, and I drink too much, they're going to start really looking at my heart and making sure I'm okay, right? They might even put me on some preventative medicines, like for my cholesterol or something like that. What they're not going to tell me is, well, if you start having chest pains, just come back then and we'll take a look, right? But how many times do we do that with crashes? We think, well, one happened or no crashes have happened. We really need to wait till something happens. And so we can apply this systemic approach to our roadways. In fact, we have an infographic that talks about that, where it looks at the health of your road system, just looking at things that you have access to. This happens to be for curves. So we're talking about traffic volumes. You don't have to have detailed numbers there. Curve radiuses, intersections within a curve. We know that causes crashes. What we call visual traps, where it looks like the road goes straight, but it actually curves. And then using that crash data that you do have can be helpful as well. So that's been a great approach for us. We do have a local road safety plan template. This is borrowed from the tribal transportation plans. So this can be a great guide for you to work through your plan. Even if you hire a consultant, this could be something that they can use or something that sort of helps guide you through that process. So just touching on that data again, you don't have to have great data. A lot of times our own agencies have data, right? Our maintenance forces have data. We have sign inventory. So we might know a lot more than we really think we do. And we want to leverage that information. So in California, you guys have great information with Crossroads or TIMS. It was really great to work with you guys on your data systems. Not all states are at that level, I'd say. So this just shows a Excel spreadsheet that we've used in a lot of states to really summarize their data. And what we're doing here is really trying to tease out those areas that are overrepresented for severe crashes. So you see that in red. We're looking at county roads here. We'll compare one county compared to the rest of the system. And so this happens to be a county in Colorado, but we wanted to look at Garfield County's crashes. Well, how do they compare to the state system? Average crashes on all roads, for different things such as, lighting or rain, something like that. Then we can actually compare them to the rest of the, just looking at county roads. So looking at their peer groups and seeing how they compare to other agencies and see if they're overrepresented. We've seen a lot with curves and that have come up, some improper turning. You'll hear some of those as we talk about, or you hear from the others today. We've also taken a lot of that information and really put it into what we call crash diagrams. Again, just looking at the data in maybe a slightly different way to look and see where those issues are. So in Garfield County, it was more non-intersection type crashes. They were in rural areas. They were happening during daytime, and a lot of them involving overturning, right? So that's something that helps us kind of figure out where we might focus. And so we could look at shoulder treatments, maybe clear zone treatments, things you're going to hear about towards the end of today's presentation from Dick Albin. This is just a list of risk factors that we use. The agencies can provide their own knowledge of what their system looks like. So hopefully they have some information about lane width, shoulder width, looking at the roadside intersections, skew angles, things like that, presence of turn lanes. Maybe you know your traffic volumes. If you don't, a lot of times low, medium, high volumes is sufficient for what we're talking about. So, and this really can be applied in various areas. So this is just sort of a laundry list, but if you were looking at, say, pedestrian areas, things like the type of intersection control would be a good risk factor. Is there a crosswalk that's present? How many lanes does a pedestrian need to cross at one time? Are there pedestrian signals? If so, what type are they? Is there a sidewalk that's present? What's the adjacent land use? Is there generators for pedestrians? Is there alcohol institutions, those kind of things? Is there lighting? Those can be great risk factors for pedestrians. So things to keep in mind. Once you've identified those risk factors and determined where those exist on your system, then we can really turn to our proven safety countermeasures. FHWA has a list of 20 proven safety countermeasures. There's 6 brand new ones you see there at the top that can deal with those kind of day-to-day things. These are all low-cost type improvements that can be implemented on a wide basis, looking at that at-risk system to effectively address those crashes. So our sister agency, NHTSA, also has a document called Countermeasures That Work that can be helpful for law enforcement, looking at those treatments or strategies that might be effective to help on that human behavior side. There's a number of resources. And I know Caltrans has a number of resources on their website as well. I think plans are a great resource, but we can provide some links to that information if you need. I know the template is on the California's website as well. So we certainly look at implementation, right? That's key. A plan by itself doesn't save anyone. And so we certainly want to talk about those things. And that's really where the plan can help get us to implementation. This is just one example from Thurston County, Washington. Scott Davis, if you know him, has been a part of our team on the NACE side. Now, Scott Davis has been a safety champion his whole career, but until he looked at this data in this way, he didn't realize his county was experiencing more crashes at curves than his peer group, than the rest of the counties. And so they ended up looking at all their curves. They had 270 that they identified for improvements. They use those proven countermeasures, things like chevrons, things like horizontal alignment signs, things like enhanced edge lines, maybe rumble strips, and he got a 35% reduction in his targeted crashes there. So really effective in what he's been able to do. As I mentioned, we've got some great California local road safety plans. You're going to hear from 2 of those that participated in the pilot and 3 that are really, I think, outstanding. So I won't take much time there. I hope some of your agencies participated in a peer exchange that we hosted in February, that Sac State hosted, that we helped speak at and helped with the agendas. We have another one of those opportunities coming up in October that will be more geared to those southern agencies there in Camarillo. So mark your calendars. We'll talk more about that at the end today, I think so as well. So that's really what I have for you today. I want to turn it over to our next presenter, and I will be online. If you guys want to ask some Q&As, we can take questions at that time.
Thank you, Jerry. I appreciate that. Even at less than 100%, you're still better than most of us, Jerry, presenting. So I appreciate you stepping in, taking over for Hillary there. A couple things before we move on to Bob. He's loading up his presentation now. Number one, if the presenters can make sure that they speak up so we don't have any audio issues, that'd be great, as well as if the participants can make sure that their volume is turned up on their end. That appeared to be the issue on our end. So if we can both do that, I think everything should be coming through okay. I actually misspoke just a little bit. This system that we're using is different than Federal Highways. I actually said put your Q&As in the chat box. Everybody's been putting in the Q&A box or the folder, and that's correct. Everybody's seeing that, and we can respond. So just continue to do what you're doing in the Q&A, and that should take care of it. And then finally, I see there was a message from, or a question from Shelby. Jerry, you probably would have the link for the template as quick as anybody, but we will try to, we have a number of links that we'll be posting either throughout this webinar, or when this is done, we will post them. We'll post all the links of information that you need on the LTAP website, as well as this webinar is being recorded. So you'll have everything that we're going over here today. And I'm looking at some people in the room that have set this up. I'm assuming that everybody who has registered today, you will get a message that talks about the recording of the webinar as well as those links. And I'm getting some head nods. So stay tuned for that. That should, I believe, take around a couple weeks to get to you. So with further ado, let's move on. Again, thank you, Jerry, for that opening, that high-level review on the local road safety plans. Let's actually move into specific examples now. The first one is going to be from Bob from Marin County. Bob's given this or a variation of this presentation quite a few times now, so he's got a lot of great information. Bob, I see you're up, ready to go, so I'll turn it over to you. So where do we get Jerry on the chat? Jerry, I'm sorry, Bob, can you please turn off your mute button? We can't hear you. Okay, try speaking, Bob.
I am speaking. Can you hear me now?
Oh, we can hear you. Yep, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Bob Garalka with Marin County Public Works. As one of the counties that participated in the pilot program, I was asked to share our story and focus on how we prepared our plan and highlight some of the findings that we found in preparing the plan. And in sharing a story, I realized that there's a number of parts to a story. A setting, initial action that creates the impetus for the story, characters, the players that are involved, a framework in which the story is presented, plot actions that are done. Usually there's some conflicts that not everything goes according to plan sometimes. Hopefully it goes to an ending, and then good stories usually have a hook that tie into some additional actions or interest following the story. In terms of our setting, Marin County is located north of San Francisco. If you're familiar with the Golden Gate Bridge, Actually, the upper quarter of the Golden Gate Bridge is in Marin County, which shows how close Marin County is to San Francisco. A population of Marin County, both the incorporated and unincorporated areas, about 260,000. So we're mostly a rural suburban community with low density, primarily slow growth. And we have 11 cities and towns whose cities and towns range from populations to 7,000 to 60,000. The roadway system is, although we have a couple 4-lane arterials, is mostly 2-lane arterials and collector roads, many of which have little or no shoulder out in the open space. A large part of Marin County is a national park, a golden recreation area, so it is open space or preserved areas. This is a graphic that shows Marin County and the 11 cities and towns, and you can see the large amount of open space and 2-lane arterials that we have. In terms of initial action, I think we're all aware that collisions and accidents happen, and they happen sometimes more frequently than we're aware of unless we track them. Many times we're aware of the politically sensitive ones that come up that we have to respond to in traffic engineering. But one thing that we realize and focus on when we're collecting the initial collision reports is we actually have on average 44 killed or serious injury collisions every year within Marin County. And that was something that as a collective unit, all the cities and towns and unincorporated wanted to work on collectively, because we realized in the county we have many residents that don't just drive on roads within the one city or one town or unincorporated area. We're all driving on each other's roads. So there was an interest in working collaboratively together to address safety. In terms of characters and working collectively together, like I said, we have the 11 cities and towns, but we wanted to reach outside. So we also worked with the Transportation Authority of Marin, or TAM, and we wanted some input from public health. And Marin General Hospital, which is the major health provider within the area, also was interested in working with us. And so those were the interested parties and characters that all had a stake in the preparation of our systemic safety analysis and travel safety plan. And what I want to talk about a framework is we had all the interested agencies or jurisdictions, but it would be cumbersome if we had a representative or several representatives from each of those to work with. It would take a lot of time to put a plan together, to coordinate. And so we wanted to focus on developing what we prepared a technical advisory committee with some representatives from 4 of the towns in the unincorporated area. In developing the technical advisory committee, we worked through MPWA, which is an organization of the directors of public works. And we went to that agency meeting and had them identify volunteers from the MPWA representation that narrowed it down to the 4 or 5 towns, and the traffic engineers or public works representatives from those jurisdictions that we would work with. And then in addition to that, we had a representative from Marin General that participated on our TAC. In coordinating, we wanted input from the law enforcement professionals, emergency and school. What we did is when we prepared a report and got the report prepared, we'd have those agencies would go back with drafts of report or work items, task items, and we'd send it to a representative from all of the 10, and they would coordinate with their individual CHP, police, fire, school, their stakeholders, some of which where they got input from an elected official, and then would bring it back to us. So we'd have our technical advisory committee that would meet periodically And then when we had a work item or task item completed, we distributed it out for review, either via email or hard document, to get them to review it and coordinate with their stakeholders and provide us feedback within a timely manner. And then in terms of finalizing report and getting adoption, we identified the Board of Supervisors to take it as an informational item. So we'd have some group to take it to that would finalize acceptance and completion of the report. And then in terms of the objectives that we identified through the TAC is we want to do a proactive collision analysis, systemic safety assessment. We used TIMS data to collect the collision report data, and then we had a consultant prepare a model that would assess based upon the existing collisions where other locations of similar nature were located, so we could identify those locations as well and include that in our planning. Once we had developed the plans, we would work with the agencies to prepare the countermeasures for those, which I'll get into a little later. Some of the findings that we identified within the report is over the 5 years, 8% of the crashes were fatal or severe injuries, but 11% were with pedestrians, and 20% of the were fatals with pedestrians, and 20% of the killed or serious injuries involved pedestrians, and about 38% of the crashes involved unsafe speed. And in terms of our proactive collision analysis, when we had that, we identified a list of high-risk locations of collision patterns and developed a list of countermeasures to address those, both in the low-cost short-term and then higher-cost long-term. This is a sample of the corridors and intersections where we identified high locations of risk of collisions, and we broke it down into a list of, for each city and town would get a list of 10 locations for collision road segments, collision intersections that were had high numbers of collisions or were predicted to have a high risk of potential for collision. And then we worked with the different agencies to prepare an individual chapter which provided a summary, and the summary identified those 10 locations and countermeasures for the locations. And we further worked with the jurisdictions to prepare a prioritized list of locations and intersections they consider for improvements. A sample from Marin County, this is a sample of a summary sheet where we provided information that summarized we had a high number of bicycle collisions on average compared to other counties, a high number of motorcycle collisions and hit objects. One of the things up here in terms of the mode, our motorcycle collisions were 11% and our bicycle collisions were 22%, which was much higher than other jurisdictions within Marin County. Some of the other jurisdictions with the cities and towns, they would have more pedestrian collisions than average. So we have a little bit of conflict, in terms of the story, in terms of if we're trying to come up with a regional priority, what we want to focus on. One of the areas in Marin County is there were a high number of solo bicycle, solo motorcycle, and solo motor vehicle collisions. And this came as somewhat of a surprise. I was expecting solar motorcycle run off the road at curves, but the solar motorcycle and especially the bicycle was something that was a little bit of a surprise. We're finding we had a number of steep roads with bicyclists where they'd be taking the downhill very fast and sometimes losing control of their bicycle, not even necessarily at a curve. And this is also showing locations like two more populated cities of San Rafael and Novato, where they had a higher percentage of pedestrian vehicle collisions. So that's something that they would want to focus on as well. And then there's also the bicycle versus vehicle collisions, which were somewhat high in Marin County, unincorporated area, as well as San Rafael and Novato. So those were areas of focus that we had identified. This is just another sample of the summary sheet of how we presented the data that we would be able to present to Board of Supervisors and others to develop further plans and work with our agencies and law enforcement. And again, I said we identified the countermeasures, broke it down into projects, potential projects by corridors and intersection, and then ranked them. These would be the priority projects and countermeasures for the unincorporated area. And then here's a sample of how we presented the priority projects, where we discussed the existing conditions, potential improvements, and broke it down by road improvements or bicycle, broke it down by mode, so we could focus on the trend as well as the engineering improvement or capital improvement. And this is the hook for the next steps, is what we did with the information that we gathered from our systemic safety analysis and travel safety plans. We applied for 3 highway safety improvement program projects, and were actually awarded the 3 in which we applied for. We did this countywide, so it wasn't just the unincorporated area. So each of the cities had their 3 priority projects, but we worked together with consultants to identify what were the highest priority projects for the region as a whole. 2 of which were in our cities. San Rafael and Novato had engineering projects that included some pedestrian improvements. But we also identified through a systemic analysis 26 intersections with signalized intersection with improvements from flashing countdown heads, lead pedestrian intervals, back plates, and other items to help improve safety at those intersections that were identified in the report. We're continuing to work collaboratively together with our various agencies and jurisdictions to identify region-wide goals, each of which there's interest in continuing to contribute, such as we're talking about developing maybe as a region towards 0 deaths or Vision Zero policy with objectives. We're also discussing education, median programs to focus on some of the trends such as pedestrian, bicycle, or motorcycle collisions that had high numbers of killed or serious injury collisions. And we're working to develop the work plan and guiding principles to implement this, which we hope to have completed by the end of this calendar year. And this completes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
We are unmuted.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate that. Great on the time and great on the content. As we go through these examples, I think you'll see, especially like for Marin, which is much more urban versus Humboldt, you'll see the distinction between the two, both though being very critical to, again, help reduce fatal and severe injuries. So I think Tom from Humboldt County is pulling up his presentation right now. Just one more comment before Tom starts. We had a couple questions on local road safety plan templates. If you could send us that. Jerry did send that link out. And again, I'll repeat this again at the end, but we will put all the critical links, such as local road safety plan templates, on the LTAP's website. That'll be blasted out to everybody that is registered once the recording gets done for these webinars. So you should be good. If you don't get it today for some reason, we hope all the information will come to you in the end. So Tom, I think you're ready. If you can make sure you're off mute, you're good to go.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
So Humboldt County was one of the pilots in the NACE FHWA pilot program for local road safety plans. for a little bit of background, I've got 1,207 center line miles of road spread over 4,000 square miles. We've got about a population of about 132,000, but 88,000 of those live in a very confined area around Humboldt Bay, while the rest are spread throughout the countryside. We get about 23 fatal or serious accidents every year. So as you can see, I've had 36 fatalities over a 10-year period, which means each and every one of those is personal. If I don't know that person or their family, somebody I do knows that person or their family. And so it's very personal for us. This is what popped out at me after getting the data. I was one of those that read every accident report, and I still read every accident report that comes through. But just that 74% of ours collisions were lane departure crashes. That just yanked out to me. Luckily, we were in the spring when we were developing these plans. And one of the first things we did when we got back was decide to go from 4-inch to 6-inch edge lines and increase the visibility and the cost actually of our paint, just to get edge lines out there. And we're doing that on all of our arterials and collectors, including many roads that never had edge lines before. We're really committed to the systemic approach, because if we don't really have high corridors or high risk locations. We have accidents randomly everywhere. So some of the engineering countermeasures that we pulled out immediately was we are analyzing horizontal curves for additional signing. We're evaluating passing and no passing zones. We actually have little to none in the county with our 2-lane roads. So we're looking at all of those. Fire is kind of a blessing at this point. The last 2 years have been disastrous, but people have realized that a lot of fires are started off the edge of the roads, and that county roads can actually be fire breaks. And when I have 40-some-odd% of my accidents hit objects, it's really helped us to improve our roadside clearing and get the commitment from the community to support us and not come out against us for knocking out some of the trees we have to take out. But we're also leveraging funding through our integrated water management plan or North Coast Resource Partnership, money that the roads department would never see that would go to fire. We're working with fire departments, CAL FIRE, local nonprofits, fire safe councils, with everybody pitching in with a little bit to clear our roadsides and create fire breaks throughout the county, which also creates clear zones on the edge of the road. And like I said, we've widened our edge lines, and we've gone to doing a lot of road safety audits. We have a local nonprofit that is very cost effective for us to use, that's very good at organizing, getting the people to these road safety audits, for various, from the schools to community members to politicians, to get out there and documenting and coming up with good reports for us so that we can have action plans for each and every one of these that we do. This is a typical, just really cheap countermeasure. Initially, there was just the arrow. We continually have wrecks at this intersection, so we added chevrons. That continued, so we actually went upstream and put bot stots across the road to create 2 rumble strips. And that was about 2 years ago, and we have not yet had another accident there. And this is one of those, if you know what I mean as a county engineer, it's a DUI road. It's the back road out of town that avoids the highway and goes from the fairground. So we have, not the best drivers on there in the middle of the night. As you can see, this guy was tired of his house getting hit. So he actually put up bollards in front of his house, and nothing has happened since. But we're very concerned about somebody hitting those bollards, but it's on private property. And despite all the engineering in the world, DUI is still a problem. Tessa was 16 years old when she was crushed to death by a repeat drunk driver. And as an engineer, we think, what can we do about that? Not a lot. Well, you can. In Humboldt County, the DUIs are about 16% of all of our crashes, but 38% of our fatal and severes. So reach out of your box. Under the state highway, the strategic highway safety plan, there's an alcohol challenge area. And I'm trying to bring our county, and I've got good support from our district attorney, public defender, probation, and our sheriff to develop what's known as a 24/7 pilot program for repeat DUI offenders. It's not anything Public Works is really going to be involved in, other than I went out and tried to find a tool that nobody else is using to bring it to my community. The 24/7 pilot program hopefully will move forward, and it's got dramatic effects in reductions of recidivism with DUIs, as well as why my public safety officials like it. It has a lot of positive effects on other alcohol-related crimes, such as domestic violence. And so we're continuing to evaluate. We have a Safe Routes to School committee that we meet once a month. We've been meeting for 3 or 4 years where we've been talking about school safety. This is one of the topics that we're working into that group, just the local road safety plan for schools. We do a lot of public outreach and education. I've got a radio station that I've partnered with where we do Be Safe Humboldt ads, and we run anti-DUI commercials, and going into winter we run things like don't drive through water, etc. But they've been a very good partner with us, low cost to do some education, which we would normally not do. And that's about all I got for now. We took what we had and immediately tried to apply it, and now I'm trying to roll it out to all the other partners that are not engineering.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it. I guess to all presenters, if you can make sure that, especially when you're done with your presentations, you refer to the Q&A to make sure that if there are any specific questions for your presentation, you would be the best to respond. So you can see just from those first 2 presentations, the difference in the detail, and what really sticks out to me between Bob and Tom's presentation is the priorities. What's necessarily a top priority in Bob's county may not be in Tom's, and vice versa. And this may be a good time to interject to say something about the California Strategic Highway Safety Plan, which is for the whole state. We have 16 challenge areas, or you really could say those are 16 priorities that we're focusing in on. Not every one of those challenge areas, or the highest ones, are necessarily what's most important to Bob or Tom or Julio, who is coming up to present here next. So Julio, you can bring your presentation up. So it's important that we not only have an overall state strategic highway safety plan, but we have these, what I call a mini SHSP, or local road safety plans, that are applicable to what is most important to the locals. And that's what you're seeing here today. I'm also going to put in, just before Julio starts, I'm going to put in a plug for anybody that's interested on being involved in the California Strategic Highway Safety Plan. Tom Matson is a member of the steering committee. He's on a couple of different challenge areas, as well as myself and some other people in the room here. We need more local participants. The majority of fatals and severe injuries happen on local roads, and unless we have that participation from the locals, your voices aren't going to be heard. The actions that we come up with, that we propose to do, they're going to be focused more on the state system versus on the local system. So if anybody's interested, there's somebody like Tom Matson that you can contact. You can contact myself. You can Google California SHSP, and that'll bring you to the web link, and it'll tell you how you can sign up for different challenge areas through that link. So again, really encourage you to take a look at that if you believe in our goal of towards 0 deaths. So the first 2 presentations you heard as far examples, those were developed from local road safety plans. The last presenter, as far as a local example, is Julio from the city of San Diego. His or their plan was developed from the SARP process. So you're probably not going to see a lot of education enforcement, which the local road safety plan does include the 3 E's: education, enforcement, and engineering, whereas the SARP is going to focus more on engineering. So with that, Julio, I'll turn it over to you, and we'll see how this goes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Julio Fuentes, and I will share with you the City of San Diego SSARP program. My colleague Phil Ross will share with you our conclusions during the last portion of the presentation. In 2017, our city was awarded $250,000 HSIP grant for a systemic safety analysis reporting program. We evaluated a number of SARP methodologies and concluded that the matrix approach is the best for an urban environment like San Diego. The matrix approach is based on FHWA's systemic safety selection tool and Caltrans systemic pedestrian safety analysis. Initially, our analysis involved 3 years of crash data from 2014 to 2016, containing approximately 24,000 individual crash reports. In looking at the total number of crashes available, it became clear to us that we should focus on injury crashes. Removing property damage only crashes still left us approximately 12,000 injury crashes, which is enough to obtain statistically significant results. As we will explain later in this presentation, focusing on injuries is the basis for a Vision Zero approach to this SSARP project. The SSARP methodology is about grouping high crash locations that have similar traits. Instead of the traditional way of looking at individual locations and trying to find crash patterns, we are now looking at crash types across the city network and seeking shared physical features connected with them. A key benefit of systemic safety analysis is that the results yield many locations, which can be improved with low-cost countermeasures. These low-cost countermeasures can cover a much wider area and are focused on correcting or improving a specific crash type. This approach may not be quite as effective as other more expensive options at a single location. But since it is effective at so many more locations, there is a greater potential return on the investment. The data is first separated by location. This is important as different countermeasures will be considered depending on where the crashes happen. The settings are the intersections, the intersection influence areas, and mid-block locations. The initial look at the data showed that most crashes, including severe and fatal, are concentrated at intersections. Therefore, our analysis is focused at intersections. We then separated the crash data by mode: pedestrians, bicycles, and motorized vehicles. We did not separate motorcycles from cars, which is something that we will do when this process is repeated in the next 2 years. This process leads to the identification of specific hot spots or roadway environments with similar crashes. Now we will look at one sample matrix: pedestrian collisions within intersections. Each column represents a unique roadway environment. The roadway characteristics used in these columns are control type for the first level, whether it be a signalized, an always stop, or a two-way stop intersection, the number of through lanes for the second level, and the ADT, or average daily traffic, for the third level. When populating the rows, we started with behaviors contributing to the collisions. So we started with collision violations as shown in the crash reports. Now, this is different from the way we analyze crash data in the past. We have always focused on crash types and not on the types of violations. This approach proved to be very useful when breaking down the data further in order to find very specific crash scenarios. The number in each cell represents the number of crashes of that type in that roadway environment. Green cells represent the lowest number of crashes, and red cells represent the highest number of crashes. The red cells with the highest numbers represent hot spots. Failure to yield rose to the top of the list, but we still did not have enough information to understand what was happening. So we needed to break down the failure to yield violation category further, first by the pedestrian's movement, and then by the driver's movement. At this point, it became clear that we had discovered two hotspot environments that had the same violation. From the driver is making a left turn or a right turn and failure to yield. From the pedestrian, the action is crossing in crosswalk at intersection. When we match the red cells with the roadways at the top, then we can describe those as hot spots. All pedestrian and vehicular hotspot environments identified were at signalized intersections. For this particular case, we have signalized intersections. One was a 4-lane street crossing a 2-lane street with an average daily traffic range of 7,000 to 25,000 cars per day. Our downtown is mostly 3-lane, one-way streets, and it has about 175 traffic signals. The downtown also accounted for a number of similar pattern hotspots, which are shown on the left side of the slide. So this is now very specific. At signalized intersections, vehicles turning on a permissive left from the minor street are failing to yield to pedestrians crossing at the crosswalk across the major street. In many of these cases, there are no dedicated left turn pockets or lanes for those permissive left turns. Our city is big, so we are talking about hundreds of intersections. Here is a map of the central region of our city showing the locations where many of these pedestrian hotspots are located. There are approximately 288 locations citywide. The task now is to evaluate each intersection and consider any and all countermeasures that may be appropriate for each situation. All these locations are candidates for LPI with blank out signs, continental crosswalks, pedestrian countdown signs, and protected left turn if and when warranted. As we said earlier in our presentation, there are many options to address these type of issues, and some are quite expensive and need a relatively long time to complete. One example would be protected left turns. However, a lower cost approach is the lead pedestrian interval, LPI, which gives pedestrians the opportunity to enter the intersection 3 to 7 seconds before vehicles are given a green indication. New York City found LPIs reduced their pedestrian and cyclist injury crashes by 14%, but reduced their pedestrian and cyclist fatal and severe crashes by 56%. Those are very impressive results for a low-cost systemic countermeasure. The main roadblock to LPIs at the City of San Diego was the need to restrict right turns on red and left turns on red for one-way streets. We replaced a static sign with an electronic blank-out sign that only restricts vehicles during the crucial time the restriction is needed, just a few seconds out of the entire cycle. This allows us to install LPIs at any traffic signal, not just the ones with light right turning traffic. We expect the systemic application of blank-out signs with LPIs will also raise drivers' awareness of crossing pedestrians, since it lights up when pedestrians will receive a walk indication. We will start with the initial deployment at 66 locations citywide. The slide shows on the left side the citywide deployment of LPI. You can see how it covers the entire city. And on the right side is an enlargement of the deployment in the downtown. And now I'm going to let my colleague Phil Ross summarize our conclusions from all this analysis.
Thank you, Julio. Let's see here. Oops. Okay, in summary, we are taking the same focus that high injury networks create and applying it citywide to intersections instead, since this is where high concentrations of fatal, severe, and injury crashes happen, and because intersections make up such a small proportion of the roadway network. This combination significantly improves our effectiveness compared to the high injury network strategy. In 2008, FHWA began promoting certain safety treatments based on proven effectiveness. This was to encourage widespread implementation and reduce injuries and fatalities. These became known as proven safety countermeasures. Before 2008, we just had a vast array of countermeasures and a few studies of their effectiveness in various contexts. Proven countermeasures give us a shortcut to the most effective ones in most contexts. And here, in the same way, systemic analysis provides a hotspot shortcut. Our hypothesis is that the same types of intersections that share common crash types in our city also share common crash types in other cities, counties, and states. It shouldn't take much more analysis to demonstrate this, and instead of doing a unique analysis for each city, county, and state, hotspots can be used as a shortcut for where to make improvements, just like proven countermeasures are a shortcut for what improvements to make. Hotspots and countermeasures can be grouped into systemic projects with overlapping areas taking the highest priority. For example, some of the locations with left-turning vehicle versus pedestrian crashes, right-turning vehicle versus pedestrian crashes, and broadside vehicle versus vehicle crashes all share the same number of lanes and volumes. In other words, they are the same set of traffic signals. So they will be considered first for reflective backplates, LPIs, and left turn pockets. So our SSARP report can be found in our Vision Zero webpage at the URL shown here. Our Vision Zero strategic plan will be based on the foundation of SSARP and will also serve as our local roadway safety plan when it is complete. We are especially thankful to SafeTrek and Chen Ryan for their contributions to this report. Back to you, Ken.
We're good.
Thank you, Julio. Appreciate you guys presenting on your SARP. If we can transition over to Dick, I think you can see the differences in the plans, and I'm hoping, I'm not sure if we responded to, or if, Julio, if you guys can take a look at the question from Lisa in regards to the matrix that's needed to do these plans for different size cities. If you guys could take a look at that and add your 2 cents worth, I think that'd be great.
Will do.
So we've gone through the 3 examples. We're gonna shift a little bit into the next agenda item, which is titled Forward. That stands for Focus on Reducing Rural Roadway Departures. Dick Album from our Resource Center, who's one of a couple people who heads up the roadway departure initiatives, is going to be speaking with us today. He's got some good information on this, since it is a big, I guess, part or percent of the crashes out there, especially on the local rural roadways. So Dick, if you're ready to go, you're on.
Yep. Okay. Well, thanks a lot. And again, my name is Dick Albin. I'm with the Federal Highways Resource Center. We're going to jump right in and talk about, safety nationwide. And one of the metrics we usually use is the number of people that get killed on our roads. It's not that we're just interested in fatalities. Serious injuries can be very devastating, but that's what we have the best information for. And on an annual basis, as an average over 3 years, over 35,000 people were killed on the nation's highways. Now, if we break that down a little bit and look at it by rural versus urban, about half of those happen on the rural system. And that might be a little bit overrepresented because a lot more people live in the urban areas. I think that maybe 17, 20% of people live in rural areas, but they account for about half of all of the fatalities are in the rural area. And when you look at those rural fatalities, the majority of those are a result of a roadway departure that happened on a rural road. 34% of all fatalities, about 12,000 people a year, die as a result of a rural roadway departure. Now, if we were looking at roadway departures in general, it would be over half of all the fatalities, but when we focus in on just the rural aspect of it, it's 34% of all fatalities. And when we talk about roadway departures, our definition is that a roadway departure is when a crash that happens when a vehicle crosses an edge line, a center line, or otherwise leaves the traveled way. So it could be somebody that leaves the road and rolls over on a slope, or hits a fixed object like a tree, Or it also could be somebody that crosses a center line and hits another vehicle going in the opposite direction. So if you prefer the term lane departure, that's fine. We're talking about the same thing. That's how we have defined it within federal highways. So that's 34,000 people that are getting killed. I'm sorry, almost 12,000 people. About 34% of people get killed as a rural roadway departure. And if you look at it state by state, you can see some states have a bigger issue than others. It's generally states that have fewer urbanized areas tend to have more rural areas, and therefore their percentage is up higher. California is a little bit below the national average at about 26%, but 26% in California is still a huge number. That represents a lot of people that won't be coming home at the end of the day. And if you do the math, take that 12,000 people and divide it by 365, that means that 30 people will die today as a result of a rural roadway departure, and another 30 tomorrow. So what we want to do is we want to talk about how can we save the people behind the numbers. And to personalize it a little bit, it also means that more than 2 of these people will be in California. So if you make it personal, as I think Tom said earlier, it could be people could be your friends, your relatives, could be you. So if you want to take that approach to it, that's great. Now, when we looked at the rural roadway departures, our databases that we have don't really have a good information on the ownership of the roads, whether they're state-owned or county-owned or city-owned. But we did mine into the functional classification. And when we looked at it, we said, the ones that are shown in green, the local roads and the collectors, those are ones that are typically maintained by a local agency, whereas the ones in blue are typically maintained by a state. But what that shows is about 45% of all of the rural roadway departures were on roads that are typically maintained by local agencies. And that's consistent with NACE, who estimates that it's 40 to 60% of fatalities happen on roads under local jurisdiction as well. And so from that, when we were looking at this EDC initiative, and I might have to back up a second and talk about what EDC is. I'm sorry. EDC is a program that Federal Highways works with AASHTO on. And every 2 years, we identify some innovations that maybe need a jump start, where we can throw some resources at it to get them more institutionalized. We're in the 5th round. Previous rounds included things like high friction surface treatment or innovative intersection designs, the design data-driven safety analysis. In the 5th round, one of the initiatives that we identified was reducing rural roadway departures. And we termed it focusing on reducing rural roadway departures. We were looking for a good acronym, so we call it FORWARD, even though it doesn't quite spell out forward. It's kind of close if you don't get too absolute with spelling. But with FORWARD, we developed a mission statement that we wanted to try to reduce the potential for serious injury and fatal roadway departure crashes on all public rural roads by increasing the systemic deployment of proven countermeasures. And so within that mission, there's really 4 pillars. First and foremost, all public roads. That's around half of all of the fatalities. So if we aren't doing something on all public roads, we're missing the boat. Then our next pillar is the systemic approach. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, but that's how we think that is the best way of addressing roadway departures, is a systemic approach. Our next pillar is proven countermeasures. We have things that we know work to reduce roadway departure crashes. So we want to try to get those deployed. And then the last pillar is bringing those all together and developing an action plan that can help agencies, county roads or county agencies, city agencies, tribal agencies prioritize where their problems are and help them to compete for money that might be available. So those are our 4 main areas that we would like to help states and locals develop further with this initiative. So when we think about roadway departures, question comes up is, why do people leave the road? And if I was there with you in person, I'd ask you the question and see how many people raise their hand. And I would bet you that if you were all being honest, that most of you would be raising your hand that at some point in your life, you have left the road for some reason or another. When you think about the reasons why people leave the road, it could be something to do with the roadway. It might be that you had a really sharp curve. Maybe there was poor friction on that curve. Maybe it was icy roadway. Something to do with the roadway that maybe contributed to the crash. It could be something in the vehicle failed. You could have a tire blowout or brake failure. A couple years ago, there was a recall on ignition switches because they were cutting off while people were driving, and then they didn't have the ability to steer. So that could contribute to why people leave the road. It could be trying to avoid a crash. If a deer jumps out in front of you, or you're driving down the road and you see a vehicle crossing the center line and coming at you head on, the odds are you're going to take the chance of leaving the roadway to avoid a crash. It might be instinctual. In some cases, it might be better to hit the deer than leave the roadway, but you know that is a reason why some people leave the road. But the last one is probably the biggest issue, and that is driver error. We estimate that over 90% of all crashes have some type of driver error in it. It could be driving too fast or too fast for conditions. It could be driver under the influence of alcohol or drugs or whatever. It could be distraction, being on the phone or doing something in your car where you're not fully paying attention or falling asleep. And I know when I first started out working in transportation and I was looking at crash reports, you know, every time I saw it said driver error, I said, okay, well, that's not something I deal with. That's something, you know, that's a driver issue. That's something that I can't affect the roadway. But I've come to realize that that's not really true. There's a lot of things that we do to help overcome driver error, things that we have countermeasures that help contribute to. And so the question is how do we get those out there? Now, earlier I saw a question in the Q&A that said, how do you justify the systemic approach when you have a traditional safety issues? And by traditional, I'm assuming that means hotspots, where you see crashes that happen at the same location over and over again. And you know, here's a map of this is actual location, actual crashes, fatal crashes that have occurred. And the green dots here show fatal crashes that happened in the year 2014. So when you look at this map, and I'm going to bring up some other dots here representing other years, the question is where would you spend your money to improve safety in this area? So here's 2014, here's 2015, 2016, 2017, and 2018. Now, when you look at that, you don't see many cases. There's a couple where the dots are fairly close together, a couple on the top of the page off to the left-hand side, where maybe they're kind of close, but in general, they're fairly spread out. Now, why is that? Well, it's driver error. Driver error can happen anywhere. And so what we find is that especially with roadway departure crashes, they tend to be pretty spread out. They tend to be fairly random where they occur. But the types of crashes tend to be the same year after year. When you look at your crash data, usually most states show that about half of the fatalities are from some type of roadway departure, but they're so spread out. Now, when you look at intersections, they might be a little bit more concentrated, so that might be a different approach. So what all this leads to is what we call the systemic approach. And with the systemic approach, what we're saying is a systemic improvement means an improvement that is widely implemented based on high-risk roadway features that are correlated with particular crash types rather than crash frequency. And we have training that's available. There's a project selection tool that Federal Highways has developed, and there's a link that you can download it at. And this is actually codified in our laws that the systemic approach is a acceptable use of federal funds to address safety. I know that some people might say, and the way I look at it is, you could have a location that hasn't had a crash in 5 years, but it might have multiple risk factors. Like Jerry talked about when you went to the doctor, you might have multiple risk factors, and it might be that it's going to have the crash next year. But if we can get to it before that crash happens, that's what we're trying to do. I think Jerry talked about this already, going to the doctor and identifying the risk factors. I won't go into it in too much detail, but if you identify critical risk factors and then look for the locations that have multiple risk factors, in some cases you might identify some that haven't had a crash, and that's why we say you don't have to wait for a crash to make improvements. Now, when we look at the national data, those 12,000 people about to get killed as a result of a rural roadway departure, and we look at the types of crashes, it breaks down to three main types. Head-on crashes, where somebody crossed over a center line, rollover crashes, and hitting a tree. Now, there's other fixed objects, things that we put out there like utility poles and signs and barriers, things like that. There also might be some natural elements like back slopes and boulders and things like that. But these three crash types make up over 3/4 of all of the rural roadway departures. So if we want to do something to improve safety, we have to do something with those crash types. And when we look at where those crashes happen, the majority of them happen on higher speed roads. When you look at roads that are 50 miles an hour or greater, 78% of the rollovers, 84% of the head-ons, and 2/3 of the tree fatalities happen on roads that had a higher speed. So speed might be one of those risk factors that you looked at. We also know that curves tend to be overrepresented in crashes. When you have a curve, it requires the driver to do something, and they may not always do the right thing. They may not slow down, or they may not turn the wheel the way it needs to be turned. So curves tend to be overrepresented. About 44% of the rollovers happen on curves, about 1/3 of the head-on, and half of the tree fatalities happen on a curve. So if you're not able to do something along a whole corridor, maybe at least focusing in on the curves might be a way to prioritize your investment. And it might be the radius of the curve that comes into play as well. Now, our main topic of this webinar, and one of our pillars in the Forward initiative, is development of an action plan. Every state has a strategic highway safety plan, and every plan that I've looked at has had roadway departures as one of the emphasis areas. Now, that's great, but what we want to get to is how can we identify projects to use the available funding that we have, whether it be federal HSIP funding or other state funding or local funding. How do we identify where's the best place to invest that money? And we think that the development of an action plan, whether it be a regional plan, a tribal plan, or a local road safety plan, that's one of the things that can help agencies identify their priorities and help them compete for the available funding. We definitely want to encourage that. California is already on board as far as the plans that have been developed, and we're hoping to see that more institutionalized within the state. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about was our fourth pillar, and that is proven countermeasures. And with roadway departures, we have three main objectives. First and foremost, we want to try to keep the vehicle on the road. If we can keep every vehicle on the road, we don't have a roadway departure problem. But we know that that isn't always going to happen. Even if we throw all of our countermeasures that we know work at a location, there's still going to be some cases where a vehicle leaves the road. So then we want to try to reduce the chance that somebody crashes into something if they do leave the road. And then our last objective, if we know that people might leave the roadway, and we can't have a nice flat, unencumbered roadside, so we know that there's probably going to be a crash, what can we do to minimize the severity of a crash? And I'm going to go over these in a little bit more detail. We have countermeasures at work. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see what we're calling our trading cards. We developed these so we could kind of start conversations. We've handed them out at conferences and things like that in the past. When we developed these, we tried to make them look as local and rural as we could. A lot of the pictures in here are from county roads, improvements that were made. On the back of the cards, we show typical application of the countermeasure, what type of crashes it might have an effect on, as well as the crash reduction that you might expect by applying these. There's also QR codes so that you can scan it and get more information from a website. But the first, the countermeasure cards I'm going to talk about is the improved curve delineation. So by giving the driver advance warning that there's a curve coming up and they may need to slow down, and also by using chevrons to delineate the curve so that they have an idea of how sharp that curve is. We also use edge line and shoulder edge line and center line striping to give the driver information about how the alignment of the road is changing. Another countermeasure that we found very good success with is friction treatments in curves. By increasing the friction available in a curve where you have a lot of demand for friction, we found that is very effective, particularly on wet weather crashes, because that's where you tend to need the friction the most. Edge line and shoulder rumble strips that alert the driver that they're starting to leave the roadway can help keep them on the road, and we've found those to be very successful as well. Let's see, I think. Now, when we move into the reducing the potential for crashes, we have countermeasures such as shoulder widening. Adding in a shoulder where there wasn't one, because that's the first chance that somebody has to start recovery if they stray across the edge line. There's a safety edge that's just a way of forming the edge of the pavement so that if somebody does leave the roadway and you have any erosion of the shoulder material, you don't have a vertical drop off that they're trying to get back over. It makes it a little bit easier, and we found very good crash reductions for those as well. Providing maintaining a clear zone. Sometimes you may not be able to get a full clear zone that's called for in your state design manual or whatever, or AASHTO, but just by providing an incremental increase in the clear zone might provide a significant crash reduction. Another one is by providing the centerline buffer area. This is one that's a little bit newer to us. I think it's been done, but we've actually just gotten some crash reduction information on them. But in this case, they actually narrowed up the lane widths to provide a little bit more room in the shoulder, at the center line. And an NCHRP project that's just finishing up, that hasn't been published yet, but they found that by adding just 2 feet on a 2-lane roadway, you can get about a 35% reduction in head-on crashes. And if you've got roads that have 12-foot lanes or shoulders that maybe can be narrowed up a little bit, just by restriping it, that could be a pretty significant improvement. And then also providing traversable roadside slopes. Sloping out the roadside so that a vehicle has a chance, a driver has a chance to traverse over it without going into a rollover. Again, the picture on this card shows a county road where they actually did some slope flattening. So it is possible. Now, our last objective is to try to minimize the severity. If we can't keep all the vehicles on the road, and we can't have a a roadside that is flat and doesn't have fixed objects on it, then our last option is to try to do something to minimize the severity. We can do that by putting breakaway supports on our signs and luminaires, even utility poles. But another major countermeasure is to use a barrier of some sort. It could be a W-beam guardrail, it could be a cable barrier, but we're trying to keep a vehicle from getting to some object. And a barrier is always going to be a trade-off, because we know that if we put up a barrier, we're going to have more reported crashes, because now a vehicle that ran off the road before might be able to recover and get back on before they got to the obstacle. But now they're going to be hitting the barrier. So we're going to have more reported crashes. But what we're hoping is that instead of having a fatality or a serious injury, now we've got a property damage crash. So barriers are an alternative that a lot of times, if you are tight on right of way, things like that, that may be your only solution. So that is the forward mission. We want to try to help reduce the potential for serious injury and fatal roadway departure crashes on all public roads by increasing the systemic deployment of proven countermeasures. Or we're really looking for how can we help you, states and local agencies to do that. I am a lead on this initiative along with Kate Satterfield out of our headquarters office. And if you have any thoughts on how we can help you, I know Jerry and Hillary are going to be helping with the local road safety plan peer exchange is coming up in October, but we look forward to anything else we can do for you. It could involve training on the countermeasures or on the systemic approach. So that's what I have. I don't know if we're holding the questions still, but I'll go ahead and stop sharing, and I'll let Ken decide where we're going to go next.
Thank you, Dick. I appreciate that. Great presentation. I really like the way you start high level on why this is such an important area. Going into systemic, the showing of those maps, really brings that point home, and then leading into the countermeasures, a lot of them that are proven that can be used by different agencies. So thank you for that. Dick, if you would take a look and monitor the Q&A box. If anything comes in, nothing came in during your presentation, but if it does, just keep an eye on that. And I see that most of you have, almost all of you have stayed for the final presentation. I hope part of that is because you thought that the presentations so far have been that good. Although we also know that a lot of you are probably anxious to hear a little bit more about the future of HSIP changes in regards to timeline and process and things like that. So Robert's gonna bring the show home here. He's got a few slides to go over that, and I'll turn it over to him for that presentation.
All right, thank you, Ken. Yeah, I'm Robert Peterson. I'm the office chief over the local HSIP program. I manage the program along with our bridge program for the locals and the ER program. And so just wanted to go and this is through our local HSIP advisory committee where we've been talking about local roadway safety plans. And I've heard enough through state of Washington and other agencies, the peer exchanges I've been through, and through our partners at FHWA that this is the direction that we really need to go to make, if we're going to go towards zero death, having plans. As you know, everything has a plan, and so it's like, okay, well, we need a plan as well for safety. And so it just really made sense for us to really adopt what state of Washington is doing, requiring locals to have a plan, and really just to show, that we're spending the money the most effective. And just before as most may or may not know, we also have safety performance measures that we have been reporting to FHWA as far as goals, and we've been reporting in the last several years our fatals and serious injuries, as well as the bicycle and ped crashes, and I think they're going to be evaluating those shortly, and And we don't, of course, don't have the final numbers, but as you know, we put some aspirational goals out there. So there's probably a good chance that we're probably not going to meet our goals that we've set. And so then there's the requirement is then we need to come back and then we'd be spending all of our 8-SIP dollars within 8-SIP, which is we're doing that now, so that's not an issue. But the other requirement is that they'll be wanting a implementation plan of what are we going to be doing in the future to reduce those numbers. And so in my mind, this is really going to go right into that plan that we're going to be presenting to the feds on. These are some of the actions and so see some of the things that we're going to be doing. So just kind of want to point that out just because there is some things that you're going to be seeing in the future as far as the safety performance measures that we'll be reporting back to the feds on. Oops. All right, so let's get into it. I can't get this to go.
Push it down.
Push down. Am I pushing the right one? There we are. Okay. So the first slide is probably of others have asked is, as you know, we started with the SARP several years ago. And as you know, we had over 100 agencies at that point that we submitted, that we asked for, that we developed the SARP program. And this was, as you know, kind of help local agencies in their systemic analysis and also you know, to help in developing applications. And so because of that, there were about $17 million that we distributed out to the local agencies. So as you can see, there's a lot of money that went into just for about 100 plans. And so now that we're reevaluating our direction, we're like, well, should we stay with the SARP, and why not stay with the SARP? And I'm sure people are asking that. Well, the SARP was really engineer focused. There was really, as you can see here, the bullets. It did not include partnerships. That requirement, as you can see, what the plan is. If you really want a good plan, you really need to bring in your partners to have them involved, because as you know, that's really, if everybody's at the table and everybody can contribute from their perspective, and that's really the whole point of pulling back the SARP and then coming forward with a Vision Zero plan, a local roadway safety plan. You know, when I say local road safety plan, to me, it's a generic term. There's other terms out there, but the elements in the plan is really the most important thing that I'm seeing, and that's the partnerships, the existing efforts, the evaluation, the enforcement, the education. All that needs to be part of that plan and discussion, and you really need to have that. The decision makers, your board of supervisors, your other partners within safety, even your other departments within your organization. Be part of your maintenance. They need to be at that table because 8-SIP is only one component, as you can see, as far as funding. There's other areas that you can use your local funds or other areas, and even when development comes in, they can help in supporting your plan. And so this is the SARP. Like I said, it was engineer focused. It had a lot of information in there as far as developing applications. As far as doing cost estimates, even putting plans together for your 8-SIP application. And so some of the things that we got this year when we did the cycle 9, we had some really good. Yeah, go ahead.
It looks like they lost year.
Are we going? We're good. Okay. So So at this point, we said, okay, we need to pull back on the SARP, and not saying that the SARP is going to be. We'll go ahead and keep that as an equivalent for now, but we're just shifting gears, and I'll show you some of the things we're going to be changing. So for cycle 10, which is coming up next year, we're going to be doing a call just like every other cycles. So next year we're going to be cycle 10, we call it. That'll be the call will be going out March, April timeframe, just like in other years past. Applications will be due in July, August timeframe. But we're really saying, okay, a plan is not required, but it's going to be recommended. So at least we can get the agencies to start thinking about it. And this is the reason why we're having these webinars, why we're having the peer exchanges. And
I can't hear you.
We're in
Are we good?
You started to get people to say,
Can everybody hear me? Are we up? Okay.
Robert, this is Jerry, I can hear you.
All right. So, okay, so for cycle 10, I'll quickly go through here and then we can go through Q&A here. But yeah, for cycle 10, we basically said, okay, let's get a carrot out there. It's not required, but it'll be recommended. If you do have a plan, when you do cycle 10, we will do whatever we can do to at least fund one of your applications. We have, as you know, the set-asides. And so anybody with an approved plan, they will then be at the top of the list of the priority. So if we have more applications that we have funding for a set-aside, you will go to the top to get that application. So I'm not going to say you're guaranteed, but hopefully when you do have a plan that your BC type projects or your applications or your set-asides will be funded. So that's our commitment. For cycle 11, which is of course 2 years after that, is April 2022. So 3 years from now, we will be asking for, it'll be a requirement. So again, it'll be a local roadway safety plan or equivalent will be required in order to compete for ACIP grant funding. Okay, next. There we are. Okay. So as I mentioned, in both cycles, the SARP Vision Zero plans, travel safety plans will be acceptable or as equivalent. And other plans out there on a case-by-case basis. Really, the whole point of it is making sure that all components that I mentioned that are included in the plan. And then what we did was we know a lot of agencies have completed their SARs or in the process of completing their SARs. So even though it's still equivalent, if you have funding left over, if you want to add more funds to your SAR, maybe to add that component that we would like to see in a plan as far as that collaborative approach, go ahead and do that into your report before it's completed, and then you will be good to go. And to me, it's a good thing to do, but it's not required. So we've actually sent out an email to all the agencies out there that have SARs in play. Some have said, hey, we've completed our plan, we're not going to go forward with it. Other ones have said, yeah, we will go ahead and add that to our plan. So another thing too is the funding. As you know, the SAR, we had 250,000 per agency and 500 if it was a combined approach. As you know, that's really a lot of money, and to try to spread that out to all agencies. And really what's happening is the more we fund these SARs, then that's that's less available for projects because we are actually taking our ACIP funds and we're converting them to state dollars. So it's not free, and so we realize that let's go back and so after talking to our partners about really what it's costing to put a plan together, as you know, some are maybe more elaborate than others. So we're committing around $80,000 that will be available for each plan. So there will be a match for that. So 72,000 of LSRP funds or SAR funds, which are state funds, by the way. We went ahead and we made that swap from our HSIP funds over, and we gave the funds back over to the state. They're going to use those safety funds, and then in return they gave us state dollars. And additional funds can be added to your into your local roadway safety plan if needed. And if you want additional project scoping and add that to your plan to help out with your ASIP applications, you're more than welcome to do so. We're really trying to provide as much funding to as many local agencies out there because of this requirement that we're going to be asking for. So we're going to be doing a call for the plans here in the next couple of weeks. So be looking for that. Some agencies have already taken advantage of asking for those for that funding. The funding is there; it's already in the bank. So it's just a matter of asking for that allocation. And so after this, you're going to probably see a call that's going to go out, and then after our peer exchange that has been mentioned in October, that peer exchange is more focused on the folks that are in the field that are actually doing the safety work, and that's really an idea sharing of what's working in your agencies, and that's where Hillary will be there to talk and really more in-depth focus about the local roadway safety plans and some of the components of that. Today was just more of a high-level approach, and there will be other areas that we're going to be talking about as well. And so I encourage you. And we're going to, like anything else, we have to limit the number of people that can attend, but at least we'll try to have, it's more Southern California focused agencies. So at least one per agency will be able to attend from there, and we might have more than we can have room for, but we'll do what we can. Okay, so yeah, and also the training. So talking to LTAP, we've got a person out there that really has been involved nationwide with developing local roadway safety plans. It's got a good knowledge base, and so we've been talking to Tracy Cohn, our LTAP director, about providing training. And so right now, she's got 2 months scheduled. November 19th, it'll be at Sac State up here, and then in February, it'll be down in Camarillo. So be looking for those if you're interested into the one-day training. So they'll be sending out some announcements for those once those are firmed up. So I just want to throw those out there. That training will be available, and then after that, it'll be on case basis. Need to, if there's other agencies that, hey, we'd like some training done, we will go ahead and go with that in the future. So these are what we know for now, and then further training after that. And that's all I got. And we've got about 10 minutes before we'll close up.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. Sorry, everyone, for the little lapse there in audio. Hopefully you can all hear us. We do have a few questions. We figured instead of trying to respond, we put Robert on the hot seat here, and I'll read those to you and you can respond. So the first two are very similar, from Shannon and Gus. Basically, they're saying you keep talking about approved local road safety plans. Who needs to approve a local agency plan? Basically, is the question. Who needs to approve that?
I think the approval, and you could talk to the other agencies, but we're really wanting your board of supervisors, your city council, some official within your agency. So it has to be a signature of somebody in your organization that has, that basically will be approving funding. And so I'd put it at that level. Even if you're public works director, if you designate them as the approval, that's okay with us. As with the HSIP applications, we're just asking for, the engineer, but with the plan, we would like that up to be a couple more levels up. So I would say at a minimum, the public works director, but if you want the other officials, that'd be just fine, or at least recommended support or recommended approval. At this point, I'm not too concerned about that. I just want them, they just need to be part of the plan and know that they're involved.
Okay, very good. We received this one on Monday. I think it's fairly straightforward. I'll throw it out to you. How often will local agencies be expected to update the local road safety plans?
Good question. I think, every year obviously that's not doable and that's not recommended. Like with anything else, 3 to 5 years has been kind of we've throwing it out there. With the SHSP, the requirements every 5 years that the FHWA is required that the state is updating their plan. That seems like a good rule of thumb. To every 5 years take a look at that. I think every 3 might be probably the time frame that you might want to take another approach. But it's really up to an agency, and it's really up to the changes what they're seeing in their organization. If there's high growth, whatever, you might want to update it further or update it sooner than that time frame. But I think 3 to 5 is probably a good rule of thumb that we're looking at.
I think we're looking at the key that you stated there is when things are they really see things changing in their county or city, and maybe with a maximum of 5 years, things are getting a little stale. Okay, very good. So I have a couple questions here from Carla. Her first question is, how are other agencies dealing with budgetary requests from partnering agencies when preparing a local road safety plan? I'm not sure if she's talking about the 10% there, when she mentions budgetary requests. You want me to read that again, or?
What was it again?
How are other agencies dealing with budgetary requests when partnering agencies when preparing a local road safety plan?
So like when you're like at a regional
I'm not sure. Carla, maybe you can clarify that through another message, please. I'll go on to your second question. Is local road safety plan funding a competitive grant?
Well, right now we have lots of funding available. So I think at this point, it's not competitive. If agencies out there need the funding, and if we run out of money, then our next FHWA, as you know, they have their federal fiscal year starts October 1. And if we use up the money that we have in there, then wouldn't have any problems going back and doing another swap and getting more funding available for next federal fiscal year, which starts October 1. I'm hoping that will happen, and we do run out of money, and we do have a lot of people that will be asking for that. That'd be a good thing. And if that happens, then we will take the necessary action to make sure that the funding is available for all the plans.
I think it's important for everybody on the phone to know we don't have all the answers. This is something that's been discussed at the local HSIP advisory committee meeting. So the more questions you can send in, it gives us more information to make the guidance and the answers better. So keep them coming. So here's a clarification from Carla. For example, CHP staff participating in the process to develop a local road safety plan, which is prepared by public works staff. How are other departments expected to use their own budgets?
You mean as far as, well, I mean, when you have the collaborative approach, there's probably going to be, the agency is going to be taking the lead as far as inviting their partners. Are they asking whether the CHP is going to participate in the funding or the other ones that are involved in this?
I think where is the funding going to be coming from? For example, in enforcement education, as examples she gives here, that's how I'm looking at it.
Yeah, right. With the HSIP, obviously it's only for engineering at this point. That's all we can use HSIP for. But yeah, when it comes to enforcement and education, there's the OTS grants. I know that they can use those in the behavioral. But yeah, there's other funds out there. But you're right. But really, this plan hopefully will then be more focused on, hey, we need more information there, that then they can then reach out to the OTS partners and to be more competitive in getting those behavioral type funding that's needed.
So Carla, hopefully we're somewhat hitting on your point. We just discussed today that we want to do a better job of pulling the behavioral side into it, pulling NHTSA, OTS, CHP into it, making sure they understand the process, hopefully getting their buy-in, hopefully so they can participate when the local agency calls. So I'm hoping that hits on your question there. We have another one from Darcy here. if SAR is equivalent for both cycles, must we update to add other elements?
It's not required, but I would like to see agencies add that component to their SAR. Like I said, I'm not going to sit there and say, no, you got to start over from square one. That's really not the point. The point is the SAR was so engineer focused that it left off the behavioral side, left off the education side, and really left off that partnership was what we're really looking for. And so if you want to take your SAR and invite your partners together and go over it, and then if there's other areas that you want to add to it, really that's the whole point of getting that partnership and making everybody aware really what the problems is in your city or your county. Is it more behavioral? Is it more intersections? Is it more ped and bike? And then coming together and say, okay, where's our priorities and what can everybody do from their side to bring down those numbers, reduce those numbers. And that's really the whole point of it is we can only do so much on the engineering side, but if everybody comes together, everybody can, hopefully help out. And as you saw with Marin County, they had a lot of solo bicyclists that are injured. Well, I don't think that would have been in a police report, but they got for that from the medical folks of saying, hey, we got a lot of people come to the hospital and they wrecked their bike on this road. And so that's where, if you can involve them, it really, the comprehensive is what we're looking at.
I'm probably saying the same thing that you are, but I think we want to make sure it's not just engineering that's going to solve this. It's going to take at least the 3 E's or the 4 E's, and you stress that very well, and hopefully that's what they understand the difference between the SARP and the local road safety plan is. Jessica has a question here. Can local road safety plan funding be added to SARP funding if a SARP is still underway? I mean, I would think.
What happened what we did the last time, what we said in the last webinar is at this point, because we don't know how much fund or how many agencies are going to be asking for those funds. But at this point, I'd rather reserve the funding to new agencies and the ones that have SARPs. At this point, I'll say it depends. Maybe a few months from now, ask again if you'd like to use some of those funds. And if we don't have if we got a lot of funding left over, then we will be able to add some. But at this point, I'd rather keep the funds reserved for the agencies that don't have a plan, and then we'll go from there.
Very good. So Emily has a couple questions. First one I think is really good here. If agencies are using SARP or Vision Zero plans as proxy for the local road safety plan, will it satisfy requirements to update those plans every 3 to 5 years, or will it be expected that agencies eventually switch over to the local road safety plan?
Well, the Vision Zero plans to me is a local road safety plan. I mean, if you look at the components of the Vision Zero, it has everything in there because that's really what it's for is the city's vision on reducing the zero. The SARP, I would like to transition to if you're for a next update, that you will then go forward and it will be called a local road safety plan. And at that point, that would be then you're removed and the plan with LRSP would be the plan for the next update.
I agree. Very good. One more question from Emily. If counties have SARP or local road safety plan in place, does that cover the cities in that county in meeting the requirement?
If they're included in it, but yes, but if not, no.
Right.
If the county just did a county plan, but it not include any of the city components, they would have to then be, they'd have to do their own, or if you want to partner together and add them to the plan, that's perfectly fine, but they would have to be included in that, into that plan to be eligible.
Okay, so we're coming toward the top of the hour. I'm going to call this the last question. Kent, we're going to we'll answer your questions in the information that comes out in the future, but this is going to be Drew's the last question here. That's really wonderful that there are these planning funds available. Any thoughts on funding for actual projects aside from HSIP? Also, if we're looking to address systemic areas like the example of a roadway which hasn't experienced a crash yet, but has similar characteristics of those that have, are funds available there?
Well, that's a systemic approach that Dick Alban was talking about and we've used, local agencies have used the systemic approach quite effectively in their applications where they've taken many corridors, and there's some corridors that have higher crash than other ones, but they've combined them all under one application, and with the low cost, they've gotten great benefit cost. So that's how we're looking at it. You know, it's not going to be corridor by corridor. You just combine it under one application, and like I said, there's some locations I know that they've had one or no crashes, but they've had the similar characteristics, and that's really what we're looking at. And we will go ahead and fund those, but just combine them under one application. It has to be the same, you know, crash type and the same countermeasures, and then when you run the analysis, you'll probably be surprised at how high BC you're going to get for that application.
Okay, great. Thank you, Robert. Ken, I'm going to have Robert respond to your question in the Q&A box here. I'm going to wrap things up. Just give me one more minute here. First of all, I want to appreciate everybody's participation, sticking with us, your questions throughout. In the 2 webinars, we had 330 participants, which I think exceeded our expectations. So we really appreciate that. And finally, again, this webinar was recorded. It will be posted on LTAP's website along with all the presentations and relevant links. A couple of those, like from Jerry, the templates where he already shared those links, but we'll put all the relevant links. And then all registered participants will get this notice on, again, the recordings and the links and the PowerPoints. My final thing is, I would just ask when you get that, not only do you look at that, but more importantly maybe is you share that with your peers. There's still a lot of people that don't know or don't have this information that couldn't attend these 2 days or won't be able to attend the peer exchange coming up. And the only reason, or the only way that we can reach them is with help from you. So if you can do that for us, that would be appreciated. And I think we'll close there, and we wish you a happy and safe day and rest of the week. Thank you very much.